Hello everybody and welcome back to the MSR Workshop. Glad you could join me on this first video of 2021. Yes, we are finally done with 2020 and let me tell you, it was a crazy year. But praise God, I was kept safe. Even though I did get COVID, I did recover. My family was kept safe. And even though it was crazy, God has really blessed and taken care of me. And so this year I would like to start off by doing a review for you guys. And we are going to be doing it on this big Rikon 18-inch bandsaw. I've had it for quite a number of years, so I kind of want to go through it. Rikon has made a few changes to this saw, which I'll kind of go through. But before I get started and dig into this big guy right here, be sure and hit that like and subscribe button so you can join me this year as I release new content for you. So for our review today, we are going to talk about the Rikon 18-inch bandsaw. This is the model 10-345. This is one of the first Rikon bandsaws that they ever produced. And it came standard with a 2 horsepower, 220 volt motor. The motor put out 12.5 amps. And it is an 18-inch saw. So what we're saying here is it is 18 inches from the blade to the back post here, and then our resaw capacity, and that's one thing you're always going to want to pay attention to is resaw. Because when they say the name of the bandsaw, 18-inch, 15-inch, 14-inch, they're not talking about how much you can cut. They're talking about the width of the blade to the post. This has a 12-inch resaw capacity. Now, if you were going to the internet and to type in 10-345, you're obviously going to get the new Rikon 18-inch saw, and it's going to be in the blue color. But if you look a little back, about 2012, Wood Magazine did a review on this particular saw, and it had a 2.5 horse motor. Now, it looks identical. The only change was the motor. Now, if you look at the motor, one is a 2 horse, one's a 2.5. The slight difference is the amperage on the motors, whereas the newer saw with a 2.5 horse motor had an 11 amp motor. This one has a 12.5. And something that I've found in me just working with machines from Rikon or other machines that are similarly powered is I've always found that the one with the higher amperage translate into a little bit more torque. So while this is a 2 horse motor, it actually has a little bit more torque than the higher horsepower one with a lower amperage. And they actually may come out very close to the same. So starting off with looking at the top half of the saw, you'll notice some little design changes from the current saws that Rikon sells. One being obviously the green color, and they've changed it to blue, which I actually kind of like the blue. The green too much resembles the Grizzly saws, and not that I have anything against Grizzly, it's just, that Rikon wanted to set them apart with, the blue color. But you'll notice the doors are also slightly different. These have a more of a rounded look. They have some nice angles on them. So they've since gone to more flat, square, nothing fancy looking doors, and it was probably a cost-saving thing. These, I'm sure, required a little bit more machining and tooling. It was probably a little bit more expensive to make. The badging has slightly changed. I do like the new badging. It's a little bit fancier than the old one. But if we open this up, we can kind of see the guts of the saw. First off, you have large cast iron wheels. They're very heavy and nicely built. They are approximately 18.5 inches in diameter, so quite large, which is nice. Keeps you from damaging blades because they're not put as much as a bend. Obviously, all bandsawers are going to come with hard rubber tires. Down here, if you can see it, we have a rough tensioning gauge, which I know most people don't use, but it kind of gets you in the ballpark of where to tension your blade. Now, this particular saw takes from 1/4 to 1.25 inch blade. Now, I'm sure you could put on a smaller blade. I bet you could put on even an 1/8 inch blade. I know the big Powermatics or other brands of saw will go down to an 1/8 inch blade. This one is just advertised to start at a 1/4 inch blade. I believe I've maybe even put an 1/8 inch blade on it. I can't remember. But it takes an 142 inch length of blade. So if you can find the blade, obviously it should fit and work good for you. The current blade that I've got on here now is a Lennox carbide toothed 1-inch blade, and this is meant for resawing. I leave this on here most of the time and do resawing with it. It works great for straight cuts as well. Definitely don't want to do any curve cutting with it, but it works great for resawing. So our bearings on this saw are running on a 46mm dual bearing, and the bearings that come with it are sealed bearings. These particular ones have the plastic cover on them, so it's nice that you can take the cover off if the bearings end up starting to sound a little crunchy. You can repack them or clean them. Bearings are fairly cheap though, so you might pack them a little bit, and if they start to wear a bit, you just pop them out and get some new ones. So here's another close-up shot of the blade tensioning guide, which most people use just to get kind of in the ballpark. And then moving a little bit lower on the saw, we have our tensioning hand wheel. And it's an overbuilt, very heavy steel, or cast iron probably, adjustment. And you can kind of look in here and see the spring mechanism for the tension. Jumping around to the back side real quick, we have a blade tension release. We have our tracking adjustment. One of the big changes with the newer saw is that all of the guide bearings are toolless now, which is handy, but with this particular saw, you had included all of the Allen wrenches and a holder built onto the saw, so you never had to go hunt for them. They were always on the saw, but you know, the toolless is kind of nice as well. And then always on the back of your saw, you have a little plaque telling you what your serial number is, your motor horsepower, your amperage, and one of the most important is your blade length, because I can never remember it. So I always know to go look on the back of my saw for the length of my blade. So next we've got our height adjustment. Right next to here we have a locking knob, and then we've got this guy, which is on a rack and pinion. You just crank it up or down to adjust how much exposed blade you need for your cut. So jumping down here, looking at our blade guide system, we have dual 32mm sealed bearings. And actually the original ones that came with this were not sealed, and they eventually did seize up. But fortunately bearings are cheap. I think these were about $6 a piece, and I went ahead and got better ones that I could, you know, clean if need be and replace them all. Also the thrust bearing back here as well, same size, that was replaced. And then to adjust these, you just loosen this, and this moves in and out, as well as the whole carriage in one piece. Moving down to the table, we have a nice large sturdy cast iron table. It is approximately 21 inches wide by 19 inches deep, and about 7/16 of an inch thick. So pretty thick. 2 built-in miter slots on either side of the blade, and I believe this saw at the time came with a miter gauge. Now the fence included on this saw at the time was not that great, and I have since upgraded it with this Craig aftermarket fence. Now it does lock good, it does slide good, but before it was just an aluminum extrusion, and then it did come with a resaw bar. The resaw bar wasn't large at all. But the newer saws do have a substantially nicer fence on them. This one does slide and flip down for cutting thin stock. I've actually never had to use it flipped down, but it's available. And then I do have T-slots if I want to put on an auxiliary or something like that, or use a locking stop or something like that. Looking at the lower guide system of the saw, it pretty much looks the same as the upper guide system, where you have dual stabilizer bearings on either side as well as a thrust bearing. All of your adjustments are the same. Now, one of the nice things about your rear thrust bearing on the lower part is you do have a knob that moves it in and out, fine-tuning it instead of just having to move it with your finger and then locking it down. The lower trunnion of the saw is one of the things that people overlook a lot when buying a bandsaw. This is super important because this is what stabilizes the entire table. If the company skimps on these, your table is going to flex and move when you put anything substantial on that table. These are about 6 millimeters thick, and I'm sorry I'm switching back and forth between metric and American, but these are of course all made in China, and so most of the dimensions on these saws are going to be written in, the conversion is going to be metric. So these are 6 millimeters thick. Now, one problem I did have with the saw is this lower support here. This is what levels the whole table. So there are fine adjustment screws on the back to pitch the table and move it when it's locked into this. Well, I was over tightening this one day and this just shattered. And what happened is I got a bad batch, I think, of casting here, because when it opened up and the metal actually broke, it was literally full of holes and looked like a piece of Swiss cheese. So I called Rikon up. They actually sent me a brand new one for free, which included the thrust bearing up here at no charge. And this saw is over 10 years old, and they still honored because it was just a manufacturing defect. So I really highly regard Rikon for their customer service. Great company, and I know that's one of the high points that people give reviews on online for this company, is just the fact that they really stand by their machinery and customer service when anything goes wrong. The table pitch adjustment is on a rack and pinion, so this guy would just loosen up here, and then you would just rotate this knob here, which would tilt your table. Another thing to pay attention to on saws is how balanced the table is to these center castings here. And I've noticed that a lot of saws tend to put more table towards the back at the post than the front or even in the center. And what happens is with these small of knobs, tilting your table becomes extremely hard to do without using two hands because there's so much weight on the far side that the table really doesn't want to tilt. This particular one is actually quite balanced, and so with just one hand, I can raise and lower and tilt the table, and then just lock this guy in place. This is your leveling screw for when your table is level, and most of the time, and I know most people don't ever move their bandsaws other than flat, but you can. And then the stop right below that screw you see there can be flipped out of the way, so the table can tilt 45 to the right and 10 degrees to the left. So this part of the bandsaw looks very similar on most saws, where you have a 4-inch dust port right below the lower bearing guides, and this saw is supplied with two 4-inch dust supports, one right here and then one at the bottom of the cabinet right here. Well, one modification that I did, and I mentioned it in a previous video, is bandsaws are notoriously bad for dust collection. So what I did is this area here, which is right next to this port, I enclose this in so I get the maximum amount of suction right underneath the blade guide and the table. So this is just a triangle with a notch cut in it that it fits nice and tight and snug and seals this portion in, because when the door's closed, it doesn't seal this up because the doors are angled, and even the new ones, all of this suction is trying to pull from this whole cabinet here, and it doesn't work that great. So I wanted to focus the maximum amount of suction right under the blade guide. The next thing I did to fix my suction problem is I created a clear plexiglass shield that actually slides right underneath the saw. And encloses this lower housing. So all my suction is concentrated here and is directed right up to the zero clearance insert underneath the blade. So I get really good suction underneath here. So looking at the lower wheel, looks very similar to the top wheel, other than you have your track for your belt. There is a cleaning brush on the bottom wheel. There is not one on the top wheel. And then you have your lower pulleys for your belt, as well as your tensioning pulley here. Now I installed a V-belt, one of these multi-link belts, down below because it comes with a standard belt. It's not the newer style of flat belts. And it seems to be working pretty good. Only time will tell. There's a bit more stretch in these belts at first, so I'm kind of getting used to how many links I need to take out of it to get it stretched just right. But same diameter wheels, same diameter bearings, and after a number of years, my tires have held up great. Every so often, I will run over them with a little bit of mineral spirits or alcohol. If they do get too tough, I'll even take a little bit of light sandpaper and just sand the wheels down just to clean any residue up. Helps your blade track and run smoother with less vibration if you don't have a bunch of debris on your wheels. One of the very last things in a cover is this little hand wheel down here, and that moves this pulley in and out and adjusts the tension on your belt. Now you need to move it in before you switch pulleys to get the different speeds, and then you just crank it back out until you get the tension that you want. So finishing off the video, I just want to say that I really do enjoy the Rikon brand. One of the big things that stood out to me with Rikon has been their customer service. While they don't make the highest and top of the line bandsaws out there, the customer service really does shine through, and when something does go wrong, they're easy to call up. You can talk to a live person, and a lot of times they'll even fix the part sometimes for free. Now, I can't guarantee you that when you break a major part like this on an old saw that they're going to send you the part for free, but they did for me, and I really want to thank Rikon for doing that. I'm not sponsored by them in any way, but that goes to show you that they really do stand behind their product. I do plan on someday getting a different saw. I may not go with Rikon, and that's nothing against Rikon, but I've been looking at some features that are only found in some other saws. I do want one with a substantially larger motor, a higher resaw capacity for doing bigger lumber. The extra power is nice because I do bowl turning, cut the bowl blanks out. That extra horsepower is nice. But if you're in the market for a good bandsaw, definitely give Rikon a look. My last advice to you before we end this video is buy the saw that you want. Do not buy the saw that you can afford. What does that mean? Don't set yourself a budget and then try to fit everything in that little box, because you're not going to find it. If there's a saw out there that has some features that you just can't afford, wait. Save your money, sell some stuff on Facebook Marketplace, sell a kidney, do whatever you can, but buy the saw that you really want. Because if you don't in the end, you may end up upgrading later, you may regret it, you may wish that you'd gotten that better saw, and you'll find that you had to compromise in some areas that you really didn't want to. So save your money, get the saw that you want, not the one that you can afford. And I'm not telling you to live beyond your means and go out and mortgage your house to buy that $5,000, $7,000 Powermatic. But at the end of the day, if this is something that you're going to be using a lot, you definitely want the features and the performance from your tool and not compromise in other areas. Thanks guys for watching this video. If you have any comments, be sure and leave them below and hit that like and subscribe button for all the content that I make.